One or two more little marks. Morning all, welcome to the charcoal tutorial for today, which is the lighthouse with on cliffs and a little bit of water. Okay, right, so again I'm going to be using my phone, but I've also got a photograph as well. So I have got a photograph just so I can sort of see it from a distance. It's not a fantastically printed one, but it will give me the general sort of idea. Okay. But if you compare it to the reference has got quite a lot of darker sort of areas in it as well. Right. So I will go a little bit darker in certain areas. Okay. And remember, you know, this is all about tonality, about getting the right tonalities in the right places. All right. So with this one, we're going to be using our little ball of cotton wool, which is wrapped up in a t-shirt material and tied up. Okay. And then we'll probably also use the paintbrush as well. So what we're going to do first is we're going to start off with the sky, because with the sky, because it's behind the cliffs and it's behind the lighthouse, it'll be a lot easier to put the lighthouse on top of the sky than to try and put the sky around the lighthouse. Okay. Remember, because when you're joining the two, so say for instance you work with this and you try and put your clouds behind here, you end up with this really weird halo. Okay, so I'm going to rather do the sky first and then we work with this on top. Right. Okay, so we're going to start off with a little ball, a little blending ball as I call it. Okay, and we're going to be working with some charcoal dust as well today. All right, so remember you can buy your charcoal dust in a big tub, or if you want to, you can just make your charcoal dust by crushing some of your willow charcoal. Just remember, it must only be willow charcoal. All right, you mustn't use any other form of charcoal because it won't really work very well. All right, I find the best thing to do here is just to put a little bit of the charcoal on a paper, on a page, and then what you can do then is just use that to dab. All right, so just get a piece of paper. Especially if you've got a small thing like this, okay, and then just put a little bit down there. All right, so you'll see there are one or two large pieces in there which I haven't crushed properly, so you can just go ahead and crush that if you haven't got it. I just actually quite like using my sharpener because it's got a nice sort of surface. Okay, so this is the way to do it, you know, really try and make it as fine as possible. Okay, but you don't have any large pieces in there. That's actually the tricky part, and that's the only thing with this particular one. It's not as fine as the charcoal that you buy already made, the charcoal dust that you can buy. If you don't have the little ball, then obviously you can just use a tissue. Remember, what you can do is you can actually take some cotton wool and you can put it in the tissue as well, as long as you've got sort of a relatively flattish area to work with. Okay, so you can also use the tissue and pick up the dust, but it is better with the ball. Okay, right, so there we go. And what I find is the best to do is to put it in and then maybe just tap it slightly, just so that you haven't got any very large clumps on there, especially if you've got your own charcoal dust. And we're going to start putting down the clouds in the sky. And just remember, when you're doing this, just remember to use a round motion as if you are making fluffy clouds. So no stripes going across. Okay. And I want you to also make it slightly darker in some areas and slightly lighter. You can change the sky slightly as long as you've got the idea of the clouds. So we're going to go back into this then with the needle eraser and then the paintbrush to soften some of those edges, just to get some of those highlights in there. Okay, just to give the clouds more of a cloudy feel, because at the moment otherwise you'll end up just getting all these big round things. So just remember, your clouds must go behind as well. So don't just stop them, you know, don't go around and just make a halo. Over here you can keep it relatively lightish, because it is, we can always bring in a little bit of grey there if we want to afterwards. But for the moment, I want to try and keep these clouds going behind here. And you can sort of go over your drawing if your drawing is relatively solid. All right, so if you've only done it with willow charcoal, then I would suggest that you try and just work softly, just dab. But if you have got a pencil drawing, it will stay behind. Okay, so I've got a bit of, I did an initial sort of light pencil drawing, and then I just went over it with a little bit of willow charcoal just to define it slightly more. All right, so I've sort of got some of the marks that I want there, but I'm going to go into it now with my razor. So just with my needle eraser. You can also use the paintbrush as well. Just make sure the paintbrush is quite clean. It hasn't got too much dust on it, because then you can sort of make some areas a little bit lighter, etc. Okay, so I'm just going to, and remember you can also go into that with charcoal dust. So you can pick up some charcoal dust with this if you want to as well. So I'm going to, okay, so when you go into it with a needle eraser, you're going to see it's going to make quite a hard sort of line. Okay, so remember you can obviously just press a little softer, not to press quite so hard, and that'll also give you a nice sort of transition. But then where it has made a harder line, then you just take the tip of your paintbrush and you just soften it there. So where you want to soften it slightly. It actually works extremely well for the clouds. I find this is really my best way to make clouds. Okay, so yeah, so just go in softly. As I said, just go in softly. That's why I'm saying you don't have to have the exact things. I'm just using the picture as a reference and sort of trying to roughly sort of follow the reference. But you must be very soft with the paintbrush where you transition between those white marks that you make. All right, so just don't keep those white marks too hard. And also don't be too fussy, you know, don't be like, say, oh, well, it's not exactly the same, you know, just sort of get that sort of feeling. And remember, you can go back into this afterwards. I often find, you know, after the lesson, when I looked at it, you know, from a distance, or after a day or so, that I need to change the sky a little bit. You know, sometimes I find it makes it a little bit bally. I'm trying very hard. And also just get up and look at it occasionally as well if you can. All right. This is where I find it is nice to zoom into your picture, because then you can sort of get those subtle variations and tonalities there with the clouds, especially with such a large scene. You and with the small picture, you need to actually look at it a little bit more, a little bit closer. So with this particular one, you're going to see there isn't really a sense of where the light is coming from. All right, except for if I look at the clouds and I sort of look at the sea, it almost looks like the sun is coming in from that direction. Okay, so and also it almost looks like, if you look at the lighthouse, you see the lighthouse, you can see is slightly brighter on the right hand side, very slightly, not much. So you can see the light is coming roughly from that direction. Okay, just keep that in mind when you're busy doing the lighthouse. All right, just to give it that a little bit of tonality, but it's quite small, so it's not going to really make such a difference, you know. Okay, so I just want to stand up and look at mine quickly. Okay. Yeah, I think for the moment, maybe just bring in. So this is where I find the standing up is working. So I'm actually standing up now and actually working on the clouds, because I find sitting down, I can't really get the right feel. So I'm just standing up for a bit and just working on it. It actually makes a big difference, the standing. Also, if you look at those two clouds in your reference, you'll see that the light is actually definitely more to the right. So you can see there's almost a highlight to the cloud on the right hand side there, and a slight highlight to it over there as well. Okay, so now we're going to start off with the cliffs. All right, so the cliffs again, I'm also going to use, this time around, I'm just going to use the paintbrush. What I want to do here is I want to get those sort of grayish tonalities down first. And I want to be able to take out the highlights with an eraser. All right. Just remember that if you took your willow charcoal and you put it down and then you blended it in with a blending stump, you're not going to be able to get those whites back because now you've pushed the charcoal into the paper. So here again, we have to use charcoal dust just so that you can erase those white areas. You can also try and leave them white as well. Okay, so let's start off with the charcoal dust and just put down a layer. Remember your cliffs as well. I'm trying to follow the direction of the cliff side, and it does go straight down. Okay, so we're not going to go this way, we're going to go down. And again, I'm working from left sort of to right and down, from the top downwards. Okay, just so that I'm trying not to have to put paper down and lean on my page at any stage. Okay, so now we're going to take our erasers now. Okay, so if you do have the pencil eraser, you can use the pencil eraser because you can get sort of quite nice sharp details. If you don't have a pencil eraser, then you can just use your hard eraser. Okay, and I'm going to cut it into a nice sharp edge. Just going to put my dust to the side here. Put that in the way. I want to get a nice sort of sharpish edge so that I can get those nice sharp cliff sections. So I'm going to go in with the whites first, and after the whites then I'm going to bring in those darks. Okay. And also again I'm going down because you can see this cliff side hasn't really got little balls. So if you look at the difference between the two if you look at the difference between the two textures here, so you'll notice that this texture, the white areas sort of go down. It's a bit of a smoother sort of feel. This has got more of little balls almost, little tapping. So we're going to tap on this one over here. Okay, so we'll see when we get to that one. So I'm just going to use a downward. Just bringing in the highlights where I want to bring them in. And use different edges of your eraser. So I find that's why I cut a piece like this, because then I can sort of use the different edges for different effects. Okay, now that I've got those lighter areas in, now I'm going to go in with the willow charcoal first, and I'm going to bring in the darker areas. And I'll only use the charcoal pencil a bit later on if I want to make them very, very, very dark. If I find that there is an area that needs to be very dark. Okay, so I'm going to start off at the top here. Okay, and I'm going to work quite dark, and I want to try and get that feeling of the trees, the tree tops. So don't make this a solid line, you know, make it little marks as if there's trees there. So you'll see there's actually like a ridge that follows the top of the cliffs. Okay, so I'm going to get that in first. And then just blow every now and again with the willow charcoal. And now I'm going to start bringing in this little section over here, which is slightly more, it's almost that if you zoom in, you'll see that this section over here has got more sort of like, almost looks like trees on the cliffside. So I'm using more of a circular sort of motion. Okay, so I'm going a little bit more detailed. But as you know me, sorry, that's just who I am. So yeah. And also because of my paper is smooth. So I need to create that texture, all right? Whereas those of you that have the a coarser paper, you'd literally just be able to put a little bit of charcoal down and you're going to automatically get that texture. Okay. But you'll see that for me, there's like a little bit of a cliffside over here, sort of the cliff coming down. And then from there, you're going to see the cliff going down, these little lines sort of going down. All right. And now I'm going to use a downward mark and then just darker where I see it's darker. And I'm just looking very carefully at the textures of the cliff. And I know it is quite far away, so you won't really see too much of the detail. But I find it just makes for a nicely finished picture. Just make sure you get the tonalities right. That's actually the biggest thing. Okay. You can see I'm using very small marks. I don't want to have to go back into it with the eraser. All right, so that's why I put the eraser on first, and then I'll go back into it with the darks, but I'm going to try not to go back into it with the eraser if I really don't need to. This is almost like a crack in the cliffside, almost like a cave almost. If you really want to, if you find you're not getting the right tonalities with the charcoal, you can also take your blending stump, you know, and rub the charcoal onto the blending stump, or the blending stump onto the charcoal like that. And then you can use that also to bring in some marks. So if you want this to be softer and you don't want it to be quite so hard, then you can do that, or you can just put your marks down and then blend it in with the blending stump to make it a little bit softer. Okay, so you can do it either way. I want the texture to be quite strong here in the foreground with this cliff face over here, and I want the lighthouse to stand out quite nicely. Okay, so I'm going to try and make this so it's not too coarse in texture, so try and smooth it out. So those of you that have got the coarser paper, just try and blend this in a little bit more with the blending stump, okay, just to give it that sense of distance. Okay, okay, so that'll do for those for the moment. Now we're going to do the one below it. The one below it is just very dark, but it's not 100% black, okay? But I'm going to go very dark initially, and then I'll just go in with the paintbrush a little bit, or the needle wheel eraser, and get texture. Okay, so these are like bushes or trees. So I'm just going to get the initial dark down. And again, it's not a straight line where it joins up with the cliff face. You can see it's sort of got, it's almost the tops of trees or low sort of trees or bushes that are there. So I still give it that impression of foliage, all right. And you can see when I did this, I didn't make lines, I didn't go across because it's not like wood or anything like that. Again, we're following the feel of what it is you're actually trying to draw there. Okay, so I'm using a little round. Okay, and already there are lighter and darker areas in this area. So if you wanted to, you could just leave it like that. If you really want to and you want to bring in slightly more subtle lighter areas, then you can do so. Just make a point of looking at your reference a bit though then, okay. So I've just got slightly lighter areas, and here I'm just using the paintbrush to pick it up, but just very softly. Also using the same sort of feel, so trying to keep the tapping motion, just to give it that sense of a bit of a downhill there. If you really wanted to go into it with a needle or eraser, just with a nice sharp point, you can do so as well. Don't use a hard eraser for this because it's going to take off too much. Remember, with your needle eraser, you can make into a nice little thin point, and you can literally just touch where you want it to vary slightly. So I'm going to bring in some of those little bushes there, little highlights. I think it's actually a little bit of rock, or may even be sheep, who knows. So I think let's work with the lighthouse next. Okay, so with the lighthouse, here, of course, now you have done a little bit of work on the side here. So remember, you must just get a piece of paper to lean on if you're going to lean there, okay? But this section over here is actually hasn't really got charcoal on, so I'm not going to worry too much. Okay, so I'm just going to put a bit of paper down here just so I can lean and I can have a bit of control. And with this one, you can see some of the areas are quite dark. They're actually quite dark. So I'm going to go directly in with the charcoal pencil. I'm not even going to bother trying to use the willow charcoal because it's not going to be fine enough. Obviously, if you're working with a larger picture, you can use the willow charcoal. So we're going to go with the charcoal pencil. Make sure it's nice and sharp. Okay, so you've got a nice sharp point. All right. Okay, so I'm going to use charcoal pencil, and if you really want to, and you want to go into this with a ruler, because some of these areas are quite sort of quite straight, you can do that. Just remember to put some paper down on the other side as well. Okay, if you think you can do it freehand, then do it freehand. All right, so just be very aware of what you're drawing here. Don't just draw it roughly. I want you to try and make your lighthouse quite sort of distinct. Okay, so just make sure that you know that it looks like it's going straight down. It mustn't be leaning over to one side, etc. All right, so start off with the top and just drawing the top little piece there, and then just move down as you go along. Try and keep it relatively accurate. Just remember, you can't erase this. Okay, so whatever you do with this is going to stay. So you'll see if you look at the closely at your lighthouse, you'll see that it has got quite a distinctive sort of shape like that there. Okay, all right, it's not just going round. Okay, so it's sort of got very nice distinctive sort of edges. It's more when you put the lines down that you're going to be able to see those. What I am going to do is I'm just going to go in with the blending stump and just make it a bit smoother there, okay? Because you'll notice it does make it quite coarse. Okay, and also now again, remember I put the clouds sort of over the lighthouse just so that I could make sure that they didn't make a halo, right? But now I can go back in and just use the eraser to get the white areas back again. Decided to bring my stripes all the way down to the bottom. And then give it almost a sort of a round feel like that there. I don't know, it actually looks quite distinctive by doing that, so I think I'll stick to that. This is where, as I said, you can play around with your reference and you can just change it the way you want to change it. Okay, so that's more than adequate. It doesn't need to be any more detailed than that. Maybe make this a little bit darker at the top here just to match the other shadow over there. That's perfect. That's all you need. You don't need anything more. All right, now I'm going to go into the building. Okay, so the top section of the building I'm going to do also again with the willow charcoal because it's got those the charcoal pencil because it's got those nice dark windows. But the rest, this section over here, I'm going to do with charcoal dust. Okay, so I'm just going to bring in those here. So with your blending stump, you'll find eventually your blending stumps get sort of quite blunt. Okay, that's why it's always handy to buy a packet that's got a few, because there are areas where you want to keep your points nice and sharp. Okay, so for this section over here, like I said, you can use the charcoal dust if you want to. You can also just put some willow charcoal down there, especially for you guys that have got the rough texture. All right, because it is quite a small area. I'm just going to bring in that dark section now. And then what I want to do is I just want to go quickly and just put down the charcoal dust on top here again. So we're going to do those highlights and do the clip face, okay? Which is totally different to the other one. It's got a different texture. All right, then we can do that after the break. So just bring in those darker sections if you want them. I'm not going to bring in the bottom dark sections. Those I'm just going to leave for the moment. I'm going to put those in afterwards. Okay, and then just take your charcoal dust and then just cover that area with the charcoal dust. What I am going to do is I'm going to leave the top white area quite white. So I'm not going to go into that with the charcoal dust for the moment. You can go in quite lightly if you want to, that's fine. But because it has got a little bit of texture to it. But I'm going to leave it relatively white. So I'll just go into it very softly with the paintbrush. Okay, cool. All right, so after a bit of a break, always good to come back and then you can see immediately if you need to change something elsewhere in the moment. So like for instance, I need to straighten out my side over here quickly. So I'm just going to make sure that this is straight. There we go. Especially with your lighthouse and that, you must make sure that all your areas are straight up and down on the sides, vertical sides, etc., etc., unless it's really specifically not vertical. Okay. What you can do as well is if you want to adjust some of these tonalities in here, you can play around and add a little bit of texture to if you want to. If you find it's a little bit too bright, not too bright, too contrasty. Okay, once we finish the rest of it. So it may be a little bit too much of a contrast in comparison to the rest of the drawing. Okay, so now we're going to go into the cliff face, and we're going to use either you can use your pencil eraser, or otherwise you can just use your hard eraser that you've cut into a piece. Okay, so I'm just going to stick with a hard eraser for the moment, and you can see this texture is slightly different to the ones in the background. It's got a rougher texture, so you're not going to be doing lines. You're going to do more of a dabbing and tapping sort of motion to get that sort of rough texture. Okay, and then we're going to bring the darks, some of the darker areas into it. All right, so I'm literally just going to be tapping. So you can see that I'm literally just going to use the tip of it, and I'm going to start bringing in some of that rough texture. Okay, so I'm not doing any lines at all, just tapping. I want to get that nice sort of rough texture going. And while you're busy doing that, you'll notice sometimes it gets quite full of charcoal. So you can just either cut it or you can just wipe it with your hand, with your fingers. Okay. And remember to leave a little bit of the grey in between, obviously, because you want to keep some of that grey. As I go further down, I don't tap quite so hard, so I wanted to keep that sort of highlighted area at the top there. So that's why I did go a little bit into the top with a little bit of grey when I put the charcoal down, just so that there is a little bit of texture at the top there. We can't just have it plain white. Those of you with the rougher textured paper, it would have automatically have given you a bit of a texture. So you may not need to do what I'm doing. You probably won't have to do quite as much, so your texture will also sort of already be there to a point. Okay. Yeah. So you just want to try and get your tonalities right here. So where it's darker, where it's lighter, you want to try and get that sort of feel. Okay, so I'm going to go in and bring my texture in with my eraser, and then I'll go back into it and then bring in some extra texture with the willow charcoal. If you find you want to make some darkers a little bit, some areas a little bit darker, then you can go back in with your dust and just maybe go in and bring in some darker areas if you want, and then go back into it with the eraser just to give it a little bit more texture in certain areas. Using the same sort of motion, the dabbing motion, as I'm using with the eraser. There are one or two areas I've got sort of that smoother sort of downward motion where you can actually sort of see waters run down and that smooth some of the edges. So you can bring a few little lines in there to give that impression if you want. Just don't make them too harsh. I really want to keep some of these really nice whites here because that's what really makes us stand out so nicely. Okay, so I've got some nice sort of textures going over there. I'm actually quite happy with those. I'm going to bring one or two more little lines in here as well quickly, where I can just sort of see. Again, it helps to stand up and look at it too again. I'm trying not to get rid of all the greys that I've put in though. Okay, so just be careful you don't overwork the whites and then take out all your greys. And just bring in some of those there. Alright, so for the darker sections you have two options. You can go in with the willow charcoal directly and then use your blending stump, okay, to sort of blend them in slightly. As long as your charcoal isn't too large, you've got sort of a smallish area. So this particular charcoal, as I said, it's a cheaper one. It's not really that good. I want to really see if I can find a good piece here that's actually going to do what I want. Oh, there we go. This is good. It's got a slightly softer texture to it. That's better. So again, you can see I'm just tapping and I'm dabbing. All right, so I'm not making big lines or big marks at all. I'm trying not to lose the texture I've already just created. And then where I want it to be lighter, I'll obviously just do it a little bit softer. And then obviously where it's darker, I'll just push a bit harder. But I'm trying to sort of work in between the marks that I've made. I really want to keep this nice and textured, okay? So I'm not putting any big marks. I'd rather spend a bit of time here and bring in some lovely little variations of texture and interest into this cliff face. Look, you can work quite quickly. You don't have to work slowly, but just make a point of not making any big marks, okay, that you have to go back in with the eraser. Okay, then on this left hand side here that's a bit darker, I'm obviously going to put a lot more marks in there. Also just sort of working around the marks that I already have. And I'm just trying to get this tonality right as well, because it's actually quite dark. You know, this side here is relatively dark in comparison to that side. So I need to really try and get that, but without losing some of the whites. Okay, that's a bit better. Again, also just using that sort of rough movement. You can probably hear the way this charcoal is actually scratching on the paper. It's got some very, very hard edges in it. Yeah. It just shows, don't always go and buy the cheaper one. I have used this particular mat before, but for some odd reason it's just being really difficult today. I keep on getting these hard random pieces in it that just sort of appear out of nowhere. It sort of goes a little bit lighter as it goes towards the bushes over there, make it stand out nicely. I'm definitely starting to get that nice dark tonality. You can see with me it takes a fair amount of time because of the paper that I'm using. So I said this you do have to spend a fair amount of time on, because it's such a big area in your drawing, and because it's got quite a distinctive shapes to it, etc. You do want to spend a bit of time with this and not just do a rough impression of it, you know. You want to try and get in some of those little cracks and some of those finer sort of tonalities in there. Okay, and then as I said, you can go back into it again if you want to. You can go in with your eraser and then bring in some other extra textures there. What happens is the eraser sort of almost smudges some of these areas, which is quite nice. Not everything, obviously, but you can see there what's happening is it's giving it a bit of a slightly different texture. So I quite enjoy using the eraser with the willow charcoal. just make sure that this line over here, where you join up with those dark areas in the background there, just make sure they haven't got any flat sort of areas, you know, so sort of give it that sort of roughish texture. Can you see what I mean? So just make sure that does look like your rocks are quite rough there. So just don't make any flat surfaces there. Just give it that impression. You can even bring some of the one or two little dark pieces into there if you want to sort of give that impression. Just not too much. Like I did there. And then this darker area, you'd have to, if you wanted to make it as dark as actually is in the reference on your phones, you can obviously just go into that again like that, and then you can spray it and then make it darker if you need to. Okay, with the willow charcoal. You can try with a charcoal pencil, but I find it does tend to change the texture a fair amount. And I don't want to get rid of it too much. Let's just see here. What you can do is you can test an area, so say at the bottom over here. Just test to see if it might work. But then you often have to use the blending stump to sort of blend in. So the very, very dark sections there are some very dark sections at the bottom. You can use that. Then just use your blending stump, because you'll definitely see the difference between the blending the willow charcoal and the charcoal itself if you don't blend it in. So you can see that does make it nice and dark there. And you can even use this right on the edge over here as well. So not that top one, because that top one is quite far away. Well, it's further away, let's put it that way. So I don't want to make that line too hard. If you want to make this line a little bit more distinctive and just use your charcoal pencil, if you rather use maybe a soft charcoal pencil or a medium one, it will work better than using a very hard one. This is a medium one. And then you can just make that line a little more distinctive, okay? And then just go into it with your blending stuff. So you can do that as well. Otherwise, you just leave it as it is. Right. Okay. Now the edges of your cliffside as well. So your edges of your cliff are very distinctive from your sky. So what I want you to do is you must decide whether you want to leave this white like this, or if you do want to make it a little bit slightly grayer, then you can bring in the gray with your paintbrush, just very, very subtly. You don't want to make it too dark there, but yeah, that'll be up to you. If you want to rather keep it sort of white, then just make sure you have that all in place before you do the edge of your cliffside. So you want that to be as you want it to be, okay? So you don't want to have to change it later on, because that'll be a bit of a mission. So maybe I just want to bring a little bit of... Just make sure you bring it all the way to your cliff edge there. I want to almost bring that sort of misty feel in there. So just bring it all the way to your cliff edge. And then you can use a very sharp point, your charcoal pencil, and then just bring in some of those edges there with that, and then you can just go over it with your blending stump. So I want you to give this edge a very nice distinctive feel. Okay, so don't just go straight down. I want you to give it that nice sort of rough cliffside that's been battered by the waves. You can see I'm not pressing too hard, because I'm going to blend it in with the blending stump there. Just make sure your blending stump has got a nice sharp point to it. Okay, so here you can see where I'm bringing in some of those extra sort of little textures on that edge there to make that a nice interesting edge. And then if you really want to and you want to bring in some little dark pieces there, you can do that with this as well. But just remember to go back into it with the blending stump, especially if you're working on smooth paper like me. Okay, otherwise it's going to be too much of a change in tonalities there. Okay, so now I've got a nice interesting cliffside there. The top piece there I'm also going to clean up nicely, keep it nice and sharp. Alright, so now we can do the sea. Okay, so before you do your sea, just make sure your page is clean. Alright. So, especially if you've got some marks like I've got on here, let's just give it a good clean. And this time around, I'm not going to use the paintbrush because the paintbrush is not going to make it dark enough, the sea. Okay, with the dust I mean. We are still going to use the paintbrush, but we're going to put down the sea with the charcoal, the willow charcoal first, and then we're going to use the paintbrush to blend it in, and then we're going to use the eraser to bring out some of those marks. All right. So the reason I'm using the paintbrush to blend it is because I don't want to push the charcoal into the paper and then it's going to be difficult to get those highlights sort of back. All right. So remember to go in the same direction as the water. And obviously where it's a bit lighter, you don't have to go quite so dark there. This is where it helps to have a nice soft charcoal. Okay, and just remember on the right hand side here, it is a little bit lighter, so don't go as dark. Now I'm going to take a paintbrush and I'm just going to gently go over this, okay? Also using the same movement, so also going horizontally and sort of like a zigzaggy motion almost. What you can do is you can just use the tip if you prefer, if you don't want to use the side of it, and just use the tip to get in some of that movement there. Just make sure where it joins up, it goes slightly behind that cliff over there. Just make sure that is straight, that line, okay? So your horizon line. You can only see a tiny, teeny little bit of it. Okay, so I've sort of got the rough sort of tonalities that I want over there. And then I'm going to use the needle eraser with a sharp point to start bringing in some of the texture of the water. So I'm just going to take the needle eraser and I'm going to start bringing in little tips. You're going to have to clean your needle eraser every now and again, or just either knead it. So what I mean is literally just pick it up, just get a new sharp point. Okay, so I want to get that sort of idea of the rough water. Just remember the water here in the background is further away, so those little white areas that you see will be quite small marks. I'm making very, very small marks over here, not very large marks at all, just to get that impression of the water there. It's a broken surface, okay. And then as I come further in, then I can start bringing in some of those bigger areas that I can see in the photograph. Also keeping it relatively horizontal. It has got a very slight curve in places, but that's just because the water's a bit rough there. So you can bring a slight curve into your lines there, but just very slightly. So no extreme diagonals, okay. Remember to squint your eyes here again, that does help a lot. you're almost giving a sort of a very slight zigzaggy, not zigzag, just draw it on here. So when you're doing it, especially with the rougher area, you're going to be using those sort of marks with your eraser, okay, to erase the light marks in.
Okay.
Just where the water's a little bit rougher. Not a pointy, just, mustn't come to an absolute point. Just sort of that. Can you see there? That's immediately looking a bit rougher now, that water. If it's not going white enough, then just use the hard eraser to do it, okay? Especially with your coarser paper. And I can see my sea's nice and definitely got a rough feel to it. Just squinting my eyes every now and again. Or otherwise just get up and look. So I'm sort of just touching the surface here and there, etc. So in this section over here where it's whiter around the edge, it actually has got a little bit of rock sitting out in there. So if you want to bring that rock, you can bring that rock in there. It's got a little bit of a rocky area there. It sort of continues on from that cliffside. So you can bring that in, or you can just have it directly against the cliffside. You don't have to bring that rock in. And there you can either use your hard eraser to make this section a lot whiter, or you can just use the eraser pencil, which I find works very nicely because it's got a bit of a point to it, so I can control it a little bit more. Just bring in those little white areas against the cliff there. So if you didn't leave any of this area white, then you can just bring in some of the white. So you can now see the waves are ever so slightly crashing over there. Just bring in some of that white there. So you can also use this as well for these, but I find sometimes it's a bit hard and I prefer to use a needle eraser. Just depends on how hard you want your lines over here, this lighter area. So if you do want a few harder lines, you can just use this eraser pencil to bring those harder lines in. Or you can use your hard eraser, the one that you cut. Okay, so there's some harder lines here. Okay, and I'm trying to keep the left-hand side darkish. So I'm going to go back into that with a little bit of the willow charcoal. So here, what I'm actually going to do is now I'm going to blend this in with a blending stump, okay, because I want to keep it relatively dark. But if I go into it now with the willow charcoal, because I use the paintbrush, it's just going to sit on top. So this darker area now you can blend in a bit with your blending stump, and you're just going to get it going in there. And the reason you're doing this is because when I go over it now, I want it not to disappear completely. I want it to stay relatively dark there. There's a bit of a trickier part, this. Okay. I don't want too much to wipe off. Okay, let's try the needle eraser here. Let's just first try the paintbrush. So I'm going to use a clean paintbrush. Okay, so I'm going to use a clean paintbrush for this. And yeah, that works very nicely. So you can see there it's not taking off too much. Just clean your paintbrush every now and again. Using the same sort of feel as you did with the other water. So it's staying a bit darker, which is what I was looking for. If you use the needle eraser, it might just take out too much. Just see here. See, if I use a kneadable eraser, you can, yeah, if you want to use a kneadable eraser, but you just have to use it very gently, like I'm barely even touching the surface of the paper, because I don't want it to be quite as white as that there. Okay, I just want to get that impression that there is water in the background. Okay, so you can see it takes a fair amount. And I want to try and keep that that dark. Just put a bit of charcoal in here as well. Just want to bring in some of these shadows here quickly. So if you want to bring in some darker areas, you go back in with your charcoal now. And you can just bring in some little shadows because your water is moving. So it has got a few little shadows here and there, but very subtle. You can see it's just a few little dark shadows. Now you can see it actually works very nicely. Just going to bring in one or two darker little pieces here, and then I will go into that with the blending stump if I feel it needs to be a little bit smoother. It's actually looking quite nice. What you can do as well is you can now, I just want you to look up quickly. So you see the section that you did over here, which has got all the white marks, okay, that you put in.
Yeah.
You can see there are some dark areas, obviously, because it's quite turbulent there. So you can bring a few little dark shadows, but what you would do is you would bring it underneath the white. Okay, so not on top of the white. You'd need to bring it underneath it because the light is shining on top and it creates a shadow underneath. All right. So you'd never put the shadow. So what you can do is you can bring a shadow underneath there. Can you see how that works very nicely? Now it looks like that water is going over. Okay, so what you could do is you could do that here and there, just in certain areas, just to give it that sense of almost like a depth. Okay, the turbulence. Can you see now my water definitely looks more turbulent there? Okay, but I mean this is something you can do, or you can just leave it as it was. It doesn't have to be as particular as this, because you'd actually have to put quite a few in to make it look right. So you can't just put one or two lines in, because that now looks too smooth. Not smooth, but yeah, it needs to be slightly more turbulent. So I'm going to bring in one or two darker marks here as well. Bring in some smaller marks in between. So not just lines, some little smaller little dark areas to show that water is moving. But for those bigger sections there where you've got the nice big white lines, that you must just bring in below the white. And I'm just using the blending stump to bring that in there. But you can see why you need to bring in the different tonalities. You can't just have a grey and a white. You know, you need to have a few little darks, especially when the water's turbulent like this. If it was just sort of like a flattish lake and there wasn't any movement in it, you could get away with just having a few little lines, zigzaggy lines, you know. Just at the base of the rocks as well, because it will create a little bit of a shadow there. So this will be quite dark, sort of where it meets up with the sea, the cliffside. Okay, so just below the cliff here is a little bit darker. All right, so you can just make it a fraction darker because it is creating a little bit of a shadow. Okay, just make it a fraction darker there. There will be some sort of reflection there. Okay, so this is now when you look at it and you stand back and if you like what you see and there's nothing that bothers you, then you can leave it just as it is. Okay. if you feel that it needs to have a little bit more work, etc. So for instance, when I look now at the Lighthouse, yes, I know it is quite a plain sort of thing, but for me it stands out a little bit too much. Okay, so I'm just going to tone down some of those very dark lines there, okay, that I've got in there. Then just leaning over here. And in actual fact, I'm just going to bring in a little bit of texture into this lighthouse. I'm just going to bring a few little lines here, just to give it a little bit of interest, because at the moment it looks very bland in comparison to the rest of this picture. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of texture there. So you guys are probably okay because you've got the textured paper. So this is probably already quite textured. So I wouldn't stress too much. It's just my particular one. It looks a bit strange. Okay. So I decided I'm going to just work on it a little bit. All right, so I'm just going to clean this up over here, and then I think we are basically done, I think. And that's about it. So if you're happy with all your tonalities, etc., then you guys can just leave it as it is. Give it a good spray, and don't forget to sign it, and then pull off your tape afterwards. And I will send a picture at the end of the video once I have done all of that. Okay, thanks for joining the lesson. Cheers, man. Bye.